Clearly, the world is going through some big changes right now, and I think part of the shift and transition is going to require a new type of leadership. And so today, Courtney and I wanted to talk about 3 different types of leadership and how to transition into this new leader that we're calling the sacred leader. These 3 different types. The first one we're going to talk about is top-down leadership, which is what we see a lot in corporate culture. What are some of the tenets that you see in corporate leadership or top-down leadership?
So top-down leadership is ego-driven. There is power over, so anybody underneath doesn't have much of a voice.
So hold on, what do you mean by ego-driven?
So I think a leader who is in this type of structure tends to be somebody who is pursuing that position from a place of unworthiness or needing money or power, or there's something driving it that is not necessarily the heart.
Yeah, so it's a personal agenda.
Personal agenda.
They're leading because it makes them feel powerful, or they're going to get something from it. I think a big part of it too is like a do as I say mentality.
Yeah.
It's like I'm in this position of power because I'm ego driven and feeding my will, and because of that I know best and you need to do what I'm telling you to do.
Yeah, that's correct. And I think that it's also fear and control driven, or fueled by fear and control. So in some religious structures that you can see top-down leadership driven by control and fear. Like, if you don't do this, this will happen to you.
There's plenty of ways to, like in the corporate world, for example, it's if you don't do this, you have the potential to get fired. So I'm afraid that I'm not going to be able to provide for my family. Ultimately, that fear-based fuel can be so subtle, and it can often trick us into thinking that it's not fear-based, right?
Yeah.
Because we're out there like doing something positive in the world. And oftentimes though, that thing that is positive you're doing because you want people to notice you, or because you need some sort of recognition, or you're worried about being cast out, or you need some amount of resources.
And I think what's really important about this top-down type of leadership is this is somebody who has their power assigned to them, typically by themselves. So this isn't somebody that you have chosen to lead you. This is somebody who has gone up the corporate ladder or has put themselves in a position to run the ship.
Even if it's not from them, like this could also be somebody that just gets assigned a position of power, right? It's in the bloodline.
Yeah.
So because my dad was the boss, I'm the boss type of situation. Or because it's like the good old boy stuff, and people find themselves in positions that maybe they have no experience in, and they've gone through no initiation, which we're going to talk about later. And so all they know is to rule with the, like, I'm in this position and you need to do what I'm telling you to do.
Or they've checked off all the boxes. Like, I come from a place of academia, and you just go up the ladder. You do the things that you need to do, and then you end up in the place that you've been trying to for 10 years just because you did the steps you were supposed to do.
So ultimately, I think at its deepest level, what we're saying here is this is coming from a leader that is not embodied in what they're talking about and what they're telling people to do. And this could be from an expertise standpoint, right? So they're not embodied in that expertise. And so in like a technical setting, people that they are quote unquote leading over are going to have a hard time with that because they don't have the technical expertise.
Right.
But it also could just be from a leadership standpoint and from a place of courage and bravery and follow me and looking out for subordinates, and all of those things are not there because in this top-down structure, you were just kind of thrust into this position. It wasn't earned.
Or
right?
you've taken this position.
Totally.
Right? You're not embodied in the mission, and you're taking what you need to feel good about yourself or to drive whatever that driver was.
So there's a quote that I'm going to read from the 21st Gene Key, if you're familiar with the Gene Keys system. If not, there's 64 different gene keys. There's 3 different what we call frequency bands. One's the shadow, so the lower expression. The next is the gift or the creative expression. And then the final is what's called the siddhi, which is the divine expression. And at the shadow frequency, everyone is a victim. The controllers are victims of their need to remain in control, and the controlled are victims of the controllers. And so that pretty much sums up for me what this top-down leadership is, and that's out of the 21st gene key, control, authority, valor. Moving on now, we're going to get into what we've titled leadership from the front. So up until this moment of time, this has been, and continues to be in some cases, a deeply respected way of leading people.
At least in the West.
Certainly. And it really is like when we think about the mythology of the West and we think about all the stories that we receive from past generations, a lot of that exemplifies this type of leadership. Mm-hmm. And this is like a military style leadership, like follow me. And on the surface, that seems like it would be a great thing. And components of it can be a great thing. Mm-hmm. At a deeper level, though, there are some things that are going on here that if we don't have really strong discernment, it can really bleed into something that is not as healthy.
I think as the middle level of leadership, this can really go back to the top down, or it can move up to what we're going to talk about. So it's easy to think about it shifting either way.
In this leadership from the front, often the leader is praised. And they are trusted and they are respected. And those are all obviously good things. So in this case, the leader did in some way, shape, or form earn their way to their position.
Yeah.
And again, technically they know what they're doing. And from a leadership standpoint, they have proven to the people that they lead that they are looking out for them, that they are doing their best to try to protect them. So, in other words, this person has embodied really important values of leadership.
Yeah, and I like to think of this person as often somebody who started in the pack and then was moved up to the front in their group from the embodiment of this leadership. They've done such a good job of embodying this mission. People have put them up to this leadership position.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a be like me type of situation, right? Where the leader has done really great stuff, and that's why they've earned the respect and trust of the people that they are serving. Where this gets a little funky is that oftentimes that process has made the leader think that that is the only way to do things. Mm-hmm. And so what happens is it starts to get dogmatic and it starts to get rigid. And instead of honoring and working with the gifts of everyone that is part of the group, we're all trying to be like the leader. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, we are all so different. Right? And fortunately, that if you try and emulate the leader, you're not going to actually be able to express the maximum capacity that you have to be able to help the group.
Yeah, I also think a really important visualization for this type of leadership is somebody at the front of the pack. If you're in a line, they're yelling back to you. The people in the line are not talking forward. There's no back and forth. It's just person yelling back down the line.
So in other words, this is a hierarchy.
Yes,
right?
Thank you.
It's not like you need to do as I say, not as I do. But it's also not let me communicate with you and figure out what you think is the best part of the plan. It's just follow me, right? Mm-hmm. I am going, I know what's best, and I expect you to try and emulate and be like me. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes it's coming from a really pure and great place.
Yeah, and each individual is still operating as an individual. I think that's an important piece of it. So they are thinking about how they are in the system rather than the system as a whole.
And also, everything needs to be known about that system and about the work that's happening in the system. And so when that's the case, this structure can work because everyone knows what's happening when they're walking into it and can have these pre-assigned roles, even though those roles might not be what is best suited to the person. Yeah. Because the subordinates in this case oftentimes have not individuated. And so they don't know what is best. And the leader in this case, leadership from the front, oftentimes they're mission oriented, mission focused. Right. They're not human focused, human oriented, meaning that their number one goal, it can be a goal, but their number one goal is not developing their subordinates so that they can step up into their maximum potential.
Yeah.
And that's where I think it really shifts when we get into the third type of leadership that we're going to talk about. And so this third type is what we've called sacred leadership. And this goes back to what Courtney was talking about, where it's not somebody in the front screaming back, follow me. Instead, it's somebody in the middle. And in the middle, they are getting information from both sides. They're getting information from the people that are ahead of them. They're getting information from the people that are behind them. But ultimately, that information comes into this center place.
Yeah, and that leader is receiving those messages with a level of humility that allows these voices to be reciprocal, right? Like they can hear the feedback that's coming in, and then they can synthesize that and provide feedback back. It's not one person is the absolute authority at all times.
Yeah, and that requires this leader to be super open-hearted, right? And to be willing to understand and to hear people and to see things from different perspectives. This person is much more able to shift and move with the circumstances and with the particular people that they have as they lead. And that's so valuable as it feels like time speeds up right now and all sorts of things are happening in different ways and different groups of people are finding themselves together. And so if we don't have that continuity, we've really got to be willing to operate from the unknown and to be able to stay open and to listen.
Yeah, absolutely. And similar to the leadership from the front, this person is given this position through trust. They have been put into a leadership position because the community trusts them. But this level of trust, again, is built on that reciprocity. So that person has relationships that have put them into a leadership position rather than a do as I am, or I don't know.
Or do as I say.
Do as I say, yeah.
Yeah. And also some people are born with a gift of leadership.
Yeah.
And some people are not born with a gift of leadership. They'll have other gifts, right? And so what's happening here is naturally the person that is able to connect with the rest of the group and is able to maintain this higher frequency and listening and also is an action taker and is somebody that is willing to make decisions and willing to take heat.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? That's part of being a leader is sometimes you're going to do things for the betterment of the whole, but people in the group are going to be negatively affected. And so because those people are negatively affected, you better believe they're going to come to you and they're going to let you know how they're feeling about it.
Yeah, and that person hears that and they take it in and they receive it with an open heart. That's one of the things that I think is really important about this. And this type of leader has a level of vision that can notice those gifts in other people as well and be able to put them within the community in a position that works best for the whole.
Exactly. So just like the leader kind of naturally bubbles up and gets to their position, all the other people that are in this group of people also naturally, based on their gifts, they wind up in their specific roles also.
Yeah.
So in other words, the leader understands that everyone has different gifts. And because everyone has different gifts, they're going to have a different role to play in the group. And it's not based on like the last type, like leadership from the front. It's not based on dogma. It's not rigid. It's really allowed to naturally shift and play and move and open.
And they can facilitate putting people into that system so that it works for them.
Yeah.
For the individual.
Right. And for the whole.
Well, right.
Yeah.
It works for the individual to serve the whole.
Exactly. And ultimately that's like the leader is the representative of the whole.
Yeah.
It's who the group has decided is the one that is holding the will of the group, right? They're making a choice of this is what I think is best for the group, because ultimately sometimes democracy isn't the way. In certain circumstances, there needs to be somebody that is just going to make a decision. And it's often in high stress times and times that it's really important. And so there needs to be somebody that's sort of representative of this divine will.
But that community has given their trust and authority to that person, and so that decision making, it doesn't feel off in any way. It feels safe because they have given that will to that person.
So again, a quote from the Gene Keys here, same Gene Key 21. This is the gift. Authority is the true vibration of this 21st Gene Key when it is found that delicate balance between allowing things to go their own way and assuming control of the way things are going. Authority is a frequency that is determined by intent. So this goes back to kind of speaking about needing to find a balance in not only what everyone is doing within the group so that all the roles are covered and everything that the group needs is taken care of, but also a balance in what the universe is asking of the group. Because this second type of leadership, the leadership from the front, oftentimes they are dictating the direction. Even if it becomes clear that that direction is not the most ideal direction to go to move forward. Again, it goes back to the fact that it's rigid and dogmatic. Whereas a leader, a sacred leader, is paying attention to all the signs and all of the symbols and all of the things that are happening as the group engages in whatever its mission is. And it will notice if it feels like it's starting to push a boulder uphill, and it'll start to adjust what's happening. And that goes back to the last part of what I said here, is that this is leadership based on intent, meaning that we aren't married to a path of how to get there. All we have is an intent of where we are trying to head. Ultimately, too, I just want to take it back to, we were talking about this person needs to be able to receive feedback. And on the deepest level, to tie this is ultimately the reason that we're calling this sacred leadership, is that we, as the leader in this style, need to be able to return non-love with love. In other words, we need to be able to take all that heat and we need to be able to feel it, right? We can't just brush it off and pretend like it didn't come. Like, it needs to be part of the equation. And as a sacred leader, you, most importantly, need to stay grounded and you need to stay in your higher self. And so as you are dealing with these tough emotions coming back, you've really got to have done the work. You've got to have understood how to deal with hard, difficult emotions. You have to have that crucible of your belly to be able to alchemize these feelings so that they don't come out sideways. Because remember, it's bad enough when things come out sideways and it's just you. But if it comes out sideways and you're leading a group of 10 or 20 or 100 people, that then the impact that has is magnified 10, 20, or 100 times.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really good differentiator from the lead from the front to the sacred leadership. In the lead from the front, I see that as somebody who potentially is hearing the feedback and brushing it aside. Not in a way that you would see in a top-down, like, I can't hear this, but we have a mission, we have to keep going, I'm going to give you the direction. Whereas this sacred leadership is really, like you said, alchemizing it, taking it in, leading through the discomfort, while also continuing to be open to community and the feedback.
And it goes back to just kind of being comfortable in the unknown. Because you don't know what's going to come up, right? You don't know when people are going to get triggered. You don't know when a situation is going to change and what you're working towards. And so we've really got to be comfortable in that unknown place.
This is leading from the heart, not leading from the head.
Exactly. And the heart is not logical, right? The heart is not step by step by step. The heart moves in quantum leaps. And it takes a degree of faith and a degree of trust in order to be able to move with the frequency of the heart.
It's no joke.
Ultimately, moving with your heart is going to be counter to culture a lot of the times. It's going to be counter to a lot of what other people would see as the traditional best route to go. And that's why it's so important for this leader to be grounded and strong and to have gone through an initiation, which we're going to talk about here in a second. Also, another thing here is that this type of leadership is what's called heterarchic. So we've got, on the one hand, hierarchy, which is everyone is ordered top to bottom. There's a leader, a second person in charge, like et cetera, et cetera. And then on the other hand, we've got heterarchy. And heterarchy, it's a level playing field. Everyone is seen as even, and everyone is allowed to contribute in their own way. Not the same way, but in their own way. And when that happens, it allows for people's inner gifts to come up and bubble through. And that's when you're really going to start to see things hum. That's when you're really going to start to see things take hold. And so that brings me to our third quote here. The beauty and magic of the 21st gift, which again is authority, occurs when both sides of the relationship surrender to each other. When the authority becomes the servant, and the servant becomes the authority, then the relationship really hums with power.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what I was just talking about. Right? When we are able to get into that mindset where when I'm the leader, I'm the servant. I'm submitting my will to the will of the group. And also, the opposite of that is the case. When the people that are traditionally seen as the ones being led step up into this place of leading themselves first and foremost. It's not about leading others, but it's about leading themselves and doing their part in contributing to the whole. Then the relationship really starts to hum with power.
Yeah. This is the embodiment of leadership is service.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And ultimately, that's why when you're leading in this way, love must outweigh fear. So if you remember going all the way back to our top-down leadership structure, we said that was really fear-based and fear-driven. Our sacred leadership is love-driven.
Yeah.
It's driven, as we said, by this open-hearted frequency. It's driven by a desire for connection. It's driven by a desire for service. It's driven by a desire for this entire group to contribute in the best way possible to the service of all of humanity and all of Gaia, not just the needs of the group.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you lean into that point, that's when you can see that leadership from the front transition into sacred leadership within certain groups.
It's also like, this is the only way that true loyalty can happen. And this is what you see in that older style of leadership from the front in the military. And I think this is when it's these like really impactful, deep embodied leaders, is that they have fostered this sense of loyalty from people and trust from people, not because they're afraid of them.
Right.
But because they respect them and love them so deeply.
Yeah.
And in that moment, that leadership from the front transcends into a version of sacred leadership. Okay, so the next piece we're going to talk about here is initiation into sacred leadership. So it's great to know about these different types of leadership, but how do you move from one type into this sacred leadership? And that's what we want to talk about now. Is we believe that what's required here is an initiatory experience, an initiation that forces you to go within and forces you to learn how to deal with difficult emotions. It forces you how to look at your own fear, how to deal with all of those feelings of lack that you have running around in you, all those limiting core beliefs around worthiness or power or trust. Like, all of these things must be processed and transmuted internally. That's why that's the first step of the work. If I'm bringing my wound into my leadership and I have not healed that relationship with the wound, and I'm not saying you need to get rid of the wound. No. That's, I think, not possible. But what I am saying is that you have to have healed your relationship to your wound and understand that relationship before you are able to step into this sacred leadership.
And have the courage to bring it into community.
Your wound. Yeah, absolutely. Like, that's the thing. Everyone wants to heal themselves before they step into community. But here's the reality of the situation, is that every one of us is wounded. And so when you show up in a healed relationship with that wound and are willing to show it to other people, that's what creates the vulnerability, the connection that allows this sacred leadership to emerge.
Absolutely. So
let's talk about what is an initiation and what are some pieces of it, let's say.
Yeah, so I think just to start off, Francis Weller does a really good job of talking about initiations, and he describes them as both as either contained or uncontained. So a contained initiation is something that you would think of in a tribal community, like a specific ceremonial process where somebody undergoes this encounter with the unknown in this contained space and then comes back to the community afterwards. And we'll touch on that in a second, but I just want to talk about an initiation, which would be some sort of life event that forces you to look at the things that you were saying. So again, talking about Francis Weller, he talks about a cancer diagnosis or a death of a loved one or a really big breakup, a divorce, something like that, something really big that makes you look at your life. The problem with an uncontained initiation process is often we don't go into those things that are required because we don't have the pieces around it that help you build back up.
I also think it's interesting that it's also possible to not have it be tied to a big event. Sometimes these initiations are acausal, meaning that we do not understand why we're going through. It's like a dark night of the soul that we don't know what the heck or why that happened.
It just happens. Yep.
And ultimately, Francis talks about just our soul decided that it was time. Our soul decided that it was time. And so what we're saying here is there is no escaping initiation. It's coming for you one way or another. In fact, again, Weller talks about this idea of an archetype within us that he calls the predator. And this is a thing that is constantly trying to push us through an initiation because it knows until we walk through this initiation, we are going to be fear-based. We are not going to be whole. We need to die to ourselves and be reborn. And we don't do that willingly oftentimes.
We don't do it willingly, and we don't do it in a contained environment that helps with the growth of that.
And that's why there's so few of these sacred leaders and so few people reaching realization or individuation is because our culture lacks initiation. We do not have initiations anymore. We do not have elders anymore. We do not have all of these things that were tenets of community that help people move from their adolescence into adulthood.
A major initiation.
Right. And the big difference between adolescence and adulthood is adolescence is all about me. It's all about how can I get better or how can I get these people to like me or it's all these thoughts. What if I don't fit in? Just all the stuff that we thought about when we were in high school.
You're learning to become yourself, so it's set up that way, right?
But we get stuck there.
We get stuck there.
Is the problem. So we don't want to stay there. That's part of the journey, yes. But then from there comes a point where we must let that part of self go and prioritize the community, prioritize the whole. And until that happens, you are going to be ego-driven. You are going to be fear-based. You are going to worry about yourself. And so we need to, as a culture, figure out how can we bring back these initiations.
Which are intended to, like you said, let that adolescent part of yourself die so that you can become in service to the community that you're part of. Like you can let go of self to become part of the whole.
Yeah, this initiation is required to embody the frequency of authority. In other words, right? Like we must go through initiation if we expect people to actually engage with us in a relationship of sacred leadership. Otherwise, it's going to default to one of these other two types. It is
most likely top down.
Most likely top down, absolutely.
That's why we see it in our culture today.
And it's also a reason why, we've been talking about some of our military leaders really are sacred leaders. And if you think about that from a place of initiation, think about what those men and women have gone through in order to come out the other side. They have seen death. They have seen really hard things, and they've had to deal with that internally to themselves. So they've kind of been forced into initiation.
And they are also surrounded with their unit and their community, which is an essential piece of that initiatory process.
Totally. I would argue, however, and a great book to read on this is Tribe by Sebastian Junger.
Yeah.
Is that we need to do a better job of welcoming back our military after something has happened, right? There's a story in that book where they were given a platform. It was just like an open mic where they could come and talk about, veterans could come and talk about what was happening or what happened in their experience. And it totally changed their lives to be able to come back and tell people who had not been there, right? Not military people. These are just normal people from the community about their experience, and to have those people hear it and to have them then be welcomed back.
Meet them.
And that's really what a huge part of initiation is because this is about death of self and stepping into the community. Well, if we go through that death of self and we come back to the community and nobody is there to welcome us back,
Right.
That's hard. And that is a big part of, I think, what's stopping people from completing this initiatory experience, right?
Absolutely.
Another way to think about this is the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell. And so often we do the first half of the hero's journey, but then when we get to the part where we've got to face the dragon, we get to the big challenge that we need to overcome, we kind of loop back to the beginning of the journey again, and we set off again on the next set of adventures and the next path. And I think we face that big scary thing, and when we're by ourselves and facing that thing, it's really hard to muster the courage to face it.
Yeah.
Whereas if we know on some level that we're doing this for community, and when we get back, that community is going to welcome us home, I think that's really an important piece of the puzzle here.
Yeah, I think it's essential. Absolutely. It's closing the loop. It's allowing you to bloom into that new self.
So what are some, what's another part of initiation that's really important?
I think also being in reverence or with the land, having some sort of respect for the space that this initiatory piece is happening. So you can see that a lot in tribal ceremonies when we think of that. But having some connection to the place that this is happening and the people that it's happening with.
Totally. And I think another big one too is this has to be substantial enough that you are forced to surrender. This cannot be a process that's kind of hard. This needs to be something where you are there is no getting through it yourself. You have to give over your power to something greater than you. And if that doesn't happen, it's not a true initiation.
Yeah.
And I'm also, this is important, these initiations are internal processes. So I'm not saying that you're surrendering in trust to other people. No, that's part of it, sure. And that's the community piece when you come back. But at a much deeper level, this is surrendering to the universe itself.
Yeah, and I think a really good example of this that I think a lot of people have experience with is coming into recovery from a substance use disorder. And often people find success when they do give something up to that higher power. That's when it
And ultimately what you're giving up is you.
Yeah.
Right? This is a death, an ego death that is required, because when we are a sacred leader, we are not leading for us. And when you are a leader, your whole life is it's not like at night you're you, right? This is you.
Batman takes off.
This is who you are. Okay, so rolling in now, we're going to talk about a initiatory experience that is currently being offered by a man named Brendan Collinsworth that Courtney is actually going to, and that's kind of what prompted us to talk about this. We really think that the more people that are going on these initiations, the more people that are organizing the initiations, the more opportunities people have to be initiated. Even just listening to this and knowing about it is really important. What is the Warrior Retreat? What are you going to do? Tell me a little bit about it.
Yeah, so the Warrior Retreats is a really good example of a contained experience with the unknown. So this organization is bringing 20 leaders from around the world to step into higher levels of service and leadership, and we're doing that by going into the Amazon jungle and then traveling all the way up to the Andes, but also engaging in high levels of service every step of the way. So while we're going to be doing a whole bunch of inner work, the cornerstone is to also be in service to the people in the lands of Peru that are holding us in this encounter throughout the entire thing. Did you have anything you wanted to add about that?
Well, just what are some of the things you're doing?
We're going to be providing health care to orphans and terminally ill children, to adults with special needs. We're going to be providing a Christmas party to children and spreading joy and bringing gifts to them. We're going to be doing some wildlife conservation, planting trees, and working on some of the eco lodges in the Amazon jungle that help the locals there, among bunch of other things. But the big thing is that every stop that we're going to, we're going to be helping out the locals and the land that is working with us.
And why is that important for an initiatory experience?
So as I mentioned, like one of the pieces that I think is essential to the initiatory experience is recognizing the land and the space that you're in, because the community is not just the people, it's the earth, it's the space, it's the whole. So the sacred leader is not only in service to the people, they're in service to the greater good, to the entire universe, to Gaia, to everything that moves into that community, that adds to the community.
Yeah, I mean, I'd also just like to talk about kind of sacred reciprocity,
Yeah.
right? And the fact that there is a divine balance to everything that happens in this universe. And so if you are taking from an experience, which is the hope here, right?
Yeah.
That this is what moves these leaders that are going on this retreat into or through an initiatory experience so that they can improve the whole, well, we've got to give something back in return for having taken that benefit for ourselves.
Yeah, we're going in to push the limits of discomfort, and we're expecting in some ways to be held by Peru. And I think if you're expecting to be held by Peru, you have to give back to her.
Totally. And that's why it's service driven,
Yeah.
right? That's first and foremost. What are some of the kind of internal experiences that you're going through?
Leading up to it?
Well, you don't necessarily have to talk in depth about what's happening there, but like so there is this service component, right?
Yes.
But there also is something that you're taking for yourself. And so I just love to, like, in whatever way you want to talk about those things.
Sure, yeah. So I'm going into this experience with the intention of cultivating courage, and that has really bloomed into the courage to do everything that we have talked about. So the courage to be seen, the courage to be held by others, the courage to stay open-hearted in regardless of the circumstance. That's really the major tenet. So I'm hoping that I'm going to be pushed to the edge and be able to practice, can my heart stay open here, or does it close as I start to tighten?
So if you are so called, these leaders are currently raising money, and that money does not pay for their trips. That's important. This money is going to these initiatives that they are doing to give back to the land and give back to Peru. So I will put a link in the description of the video so that you can donate to that if you are willing and able to do so. Is there anything that you want to add there?
We are continuing to raise money for another 2 weeks, I believe. We start the retreat on December 1st, and we'll begin our service December 5th, I believe. This is leadership, and talking about this type of leadership really is something that lives on my heart. And so as I practice this and learn, I'm going into this experience humbly, and I hope to bring back lots of lessons and be able to talk about what this looks like in action.
So just to leave you with some closing thoughts on sacred leadership here, the biggest idea that I want to get across is that as a sacred leader, you are not telling people what to do. Instead, you are pointing to the sacred, both internally and externally, and internally to that individual. You are just a constant reminder of the sacred. And by giving that reminder, you show people their own gifts. You give them the ability to see what they have within, right? It goes back to the Latin educare, which is the root of education, which is about teasing out what is already innate in somebody. That's what education is about. It's not planting facts in people. It's helping to find their unique genius, their unique set of gifts, and to allow that to bubble up. And that happens not by telling people things, giving them knowledge, or even saying, look what I'm doing as my example.
Right.
It comes by giving them space and helping them to remember what they really are at the core of their being.
Yeah.
So my last ask for you is, as people come back from initiatory experiences, be it something like this, like a warrior retreat, or if you know somebody in the military, or if it is an unorganized initiation, or whatever word we use there, uncontained initiation, right? It's just somebody going through something, through a dark night of the soul in their lives. Be that community that welcomes them home. If we can start to do that for one another, we're going to have a lot more people that are going through this process.
Yeah.
And that means we're going to have a lot more sacred leaders. And that means I really think we'll be able to shift as we feel this shift that's happening already. We've got to get ourselves through this process and caught up to what Gaia is going through now so that we can usher in this next epoch.
I agree wholeheartedly.
All right, guys, thank you for being here. Until next time.